Hey, thanks for being here. This is Companion Saga. A man builds everything he has over 4 decades, and the person he trusted most spends years quietly tearing it down. But what she never counted on was the one person sitting quietly at the kitchen table every morning, watching, waiting, and keeping records. Stay with me until the end. Your Honor, before my client signs anything, my daughter stood up from the back of the conference room. I need to present something to this mediation. She was 24 years old. She had driven 6 hours from Portland the night before, slept on my couch, and shown up that morning in a blazer I had never seen her wear before, carrying a leather folder she had bought specifically for this day. The mediator, a gray-haired woman named Patricia Holloway, who had been doing this for 30 years, looked up over her reading glasses with mild surprise. This was supposed to be a formality. The paperwork was already drafted. The asset division had already been negotiated. All that remained was my signature, agreeing to walk away from 31 years of marriage with less than a third of what I had helped build. My wife, Sandra, was sitting across the table with her attorney, a sharp man named Jeffrey Marsh, who wore pocket squares and charged $400 an hour. Sandra's face went from composed to something else entirely the moment my daughter stood up. "Sit down, sweetheart." Her voice was controlled, low. "This isn't your business." My daughter looked at her for a long moment. "Actually, Mom, it is." She opened the leather folder and set a thick stack of documents on the conference table. "I've been going through Dad's financial records for the past 8 months, and I found some things that everyone in this room needs to see before anyone signs anything." Sandra reached across the table as if she might physically stop it. "Those are private, those are." My daughter slid the stack toward Patricia Holloway before Sandra's hand could get there. "They're Dad's records. He gave me access, and what they show is fraud." The room went silent. Jeffrey Marsh stopped writing. Patricia Holloway picked up the first page, and her expression changed within seconds. Sandra looked at me, then at my daughter, then at the door. And I watched my wife of 31 years make a calculation I recognized, because I had seen that same look on her face for years without ever understanding what it meant. She stood up and reached for her handbag. "Mrs. Calloway," Patricia Holloway said evenly, "please sit down. I need some air. I just need a moment. I'm asking you to sit down." Sandra sought, but her hands were trembling, and the version of her that had walked in that morning, polished, certain, utterly in control, had already begun to disappear. My daughter looked at me from across the table. "I told you, Dad. I told you we had to wait." She was right. She had been right about everything. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm 62 years old. I spent 34 years working as a licensed contractor in the greater Columbus, Ohio area, building the kind of business that doesn't come from luck but from 6 a.m. mornings and calloused hands and never canceling on a client no matter what your back feels like. Nothing dramatic. Just steady, honest work that let me own a home, raise a family, and believe I was doing right by the people I loved. I met Sandra at a community fundraiser in 1991. She was 27, working as a bookkeeper for a dental practice downtown, funny in that dry, quiet way that I always found more attractive than loud humor. I was 29 and had just incorporated my business. We dated for 2 years, got married in the spring of 1993, and for the first decade or so, I thought we were happy. I genuinely thought we were happy. Sandra stopped working when our daughter was born in 1999. We had a son 2 years later. I covered everything on my income alone, which I did willingly. I wanted her to have what she wanted. That was always the deal, or at least that's what I told myself. She wanted a bigger house, so we moved. She wanted the kids in private school, so I took on more projects. She wanted 2 weeks in Europe for our 20th anniversary, so I worked through the previous December to afford it. Every want I treated like a reasonable request and found a way to say yes. The first time something felt wrong was in 2017. Our son was 16, our daughter was 18 and had just left for college. Sandra had started going to a book club on Wednesday evenings, which I thought nothing of. I'm not someone who questions. I've never been someone who questions. That turned out to be a significant flaw. One Wednesday, I came home early from a job site. A pipe had burst, and the client asked us to stop for the day, and the house was empty. Sandra's car wasn't in the driveway. I thought nothing of it. But when I went to pay a utility bill online, I noticed the checking account balance was lower than it should have been. Not dramatically. A few $100s? I assumed I had miscounted something and let it go. I was wrong to let it go. I let a lot of things go. There was a man. There is almost always a man when the story goes this way. His name was Dennis Holt, and he ran an investment consulting firm in Dublin, a suburb east of Columbus where a lot of money moved quietly between people who had too much of it. He was 55, recently divorced, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a second jacket. Sandra had met him at a charity gala she attended with a friend in the fall of 2016. I know this now. I didn't know it then. The signs were there if I had been willing to see them. The new clothes she bought without mentioning them, the evenings that started running longer than a book club should, the way she would leave the room to take certain phone calls, the way she stopped asking about my workday, then stopped asking about much of anything. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself she was adjusting to the kids getting older. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true, because the true version of events was something I wasn't ready to look at. I should tell you about my daughter. She has always been sharper than I gave her credit for. She was working on her MBA at Portland State and had spent 2 summers interning at a financial auditing firm, the kind of detail work that trains you to notice when numbers don't add up. She had come home for Christmas in 2022 and asked me, with the particular gentleness of someone trying not to alarm you, whether I had looked at my retirement account recently. I hadn't. I trusted Sandra to handle most of our finances. She had been a bookkeeper. It seemed logical. It was the most expensive logical decision I ever made. That Christmas, my daughter sat with me at the kitchen table and we pulled up the accounts together. What I saw made me feel physically ill. Over the previous 4 years, money had been moving in ways I couldn't immediately explain. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here, a transfer there, then larger, a wire of $11,000 to an account I didn't recognize, a withdrawal from the investment portfolio that I had no memory of authorizing, automatic payments to what appeared to be credit cards I had never applied for. She's been doing this for years, my daughter said quietly. She wasn't guessing. She had already done preliminary math. At least $150,000, maybe more. Dad, she has accounts you don't know about. I wanted to confront Sandra immediately. My daughter stopped me the same way a careful person talks a careless one back from a ledge. If you say something now, she'll move everything she can and deny the rest. She'll say you misread the statements. She'll say it was all agreed upon and you forgot. She'll make you look confused and paranoid, and then she'll have everything locked down before any attorney can find it. Dad, I need more time. Will you give me more time? I didn't sleep well for the next 8 months, but I gave her the time. My daughter worked on it from Portland, remotely, going through every document I could photograph and send her. Bank statements going back 6 years, tax returns, mortgage refinancing paperwork, credit card bills that had come to our address and that I had apparently signed off on during a period I could only describe as a sustained fog of trusting someone completely. What she found, layer by layer, was not an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a system. Sandra had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for years, routing it through an individual account she had opened in her name only in 2016, the same year she met Dennis Holt. From there, money moved to a second account my daughter eventually traced to a Florida LLC that Sandra had been listed as a member of since 2018. I was not listed. I was never consulted. I had signed something during a refinance in 2019 that I had been told was a routine lender document. It was not a routine lender document. The total, my daughter documented, conservatively, was $280,000. That was the amount she could prove with the records I had access to. She believed the actual number was higher. She called me on a Tuesday night in August of 2023. Dad, I have everything I need. But there's something else. Something you need to sit down for. I sat down. She had been going through email records. an old shared family account that Sandra had apparently forgotten was still synced to a laptop in my home office. There were emails going back 5 years. Conversations between Sandra and Dennis that made clear the relationship had never been casual. Made clear it had been, from very early on, partly transactional. Dennis had legal and financial connections. Sandra had used them. There were messages discussing the LLC. Messages discussing the divorce she was already planning in 2019, 4 years before she filed. Messages that laid out, with a clarity that was almost clinical, exactly how much she expected to walk away with and how she intended to make sure I had as little recourse as possible. There was one email that I will not repeat word for word because I don't need to hear it again. But the substance of it was that Sandra had told Dennis, in the fall of 2020, that she was not worried about the settlement because she had been, and I am paraphrasing here, taking care of the math for years, and by the time it was over, my understanding of our finances would be so confused that any lawyer I hired would spend half their time just trying to untangle what happened. She wasn't wrong that I was confused. She was wrong that my daughter would let it stay that way. She filed for divorce in January of 2023. She was calm about it. That calmness, looking back, was the calmness of someone who believes they have already won. She told me she was unhappy and had been for a long time, and that she hoped we could make this civil. Her attorney contacted my attorney, and the process began. She wanted the house. She wanted 60% of our remaining assets. She wanted long-term spousal support based on 31 years of marriage and no current employment. On paper, without context, the claims were not unreasonable. A judge might have approved most of them without looking hard. My attorney, a capable woman named Christine Elway, who specialized in contested assets, was concerned from the beginning that something didn't add up, but she needed documentation to make the argument. My daughter was already building it. The 8 months between January and August of 2023 were the longest of my life. I had to sit through mediation sessions and watch Sandra perform a version of quiet resignation, the long-suffering wife finally freeing herself from a marriage she had outgrown. Her attorney was polished and patient. Mine was good, but working with limited information. I knew what was coming. My daughter had told me to hold on. So I held on. What I did not fully understand until later was how much my daughter was carrying during that time. She had taken on the investigative work alongside a full course load and a part-time job. She had spent weekends cross-referencing financial documents instead of doing the things 24-year-olds do on weekends. She had kept the secret from her brother, from her friends, from everyone except Christine Elway, because we agreed that limiting the circle was the only way to prevent Sandra from getting wind of what was being assembled. She had called me every Sunday evening, and every Sunday evening she had listened to me cycle through anger and grief and disbelief, and every time she had said the same thing. "Hold on, Dad. We're almost there. Trust me." I did trust her. I just didn't fully understand yet what that trust had cost her. The mediation session was scheduled for September 19th, 2023. Sandra's attorney had presented a final settlement offer the week before. Christine Elway had advised me that without more evidence, accepting a modified version might be the pragmatic choice. I told her to wait 1 more week. She agreed, reluctantly. My daughter arrived the night before, as I said, and slept on my couch. We sat up until almost midnight, going over everything. She had organized it all in that leather folder with the kind of precision that told me exactly how long she had been planning this moment. She walked me through each document, each exhibit, what it showed and why it mattered. She was calm in a way that I was not. "How are you this steady?" I asked her at some point. "Because I've had 8 months to be angry," she said. "I'm done being angry. Now I just want it to be over." The next morning, we drove to the mediator's office together. Sandra and her attorney were already there when we arrived. Sandra looked at my daughter with the particular expression of a parent who expects compliance and receives something else entirely. She stood up when she reached the table. And everything I described at the beginning of this is exactly what happened next. Patricia Holloway spent 40 minutes reviewing the documents before she said another word. Jeffrey Marsh reviewed copies his client had never shown him, and the look on his face shifted in real time from professional composure to something harder to name. Sandra sat with her hands folded in her lap and said almost nothing. Once, she said it was taken out of context. Once, she said that the transfers were for shared expenses. Patricia Holloway acknowledged both statements and continued reading. When the mediator finally set the papers down, she addressed Sandra's attorney directly. "Mr. Marsh, I am suspending this session. The documentation presented suggests that the financial disclosures your client provided during this process may have been materially incomplete." She paused. "I am strongly recommending that both parties engage their attorneys for a formal court proceeding and that a forensic accountant review the complete marital asset history before any settlement is finalized." She looked at Sandra. "Mrs. Calloway, I would encourage you to speak with your attorney privately and candidly before this goes further." Sandra's composure had been breaking in small ways for the past 40 minutes. A tightness around the eyes, fingers that wouldn't quite stay still. The version of her that had walked in that morning expecting to complete a transaction had been replaced by something that looked smaller and more afraid. She looked at me for the first time since the session had derailed. "Robert, I can explain. I didn't say anything. There was nothing I needed to say." My daughter put her hand on the table between us, not toward Sandra, just steady there, and looked at her mother without expression. "The explanations don't change what the documents show, Mom." That was all. The formal proceedings took another 5 months. A forensic accountant was brought in and confirmed what my daughter had found, and then found more. The final documented total came to $340,000, moved or misappropriated over 7 years. The Florida LLC was examined. Dennis Holt's involvement in the financial structuring was documented. A separate legal matter involving potential civil liability for him was referred to an attorney I will not name here because that process is still ongoing. Sandra was not charged criminally, though it was considered. The district attorney's office reviewed the case and determined that several of the transactions occupied legal gray areas that would make prosecution difficult. What happened instead was a civil reckoning. The divorce settlement was completely restructured. I received the house. I received 80% of the remaining documented assets. Sandra was required to account for the transferred funds as marital property, which effectively zeroed out most of what she had been expecting to receive. Long-term spousal support was denied based on her history of undisclosed income through the LLC. Jeffrey Marsh quietly withdrew from the case after the forensic report came back. He submitted a notice of withdrawal, citing a conflict of interest, and said nothing further publicly. I heard later that Sandra went through 2 more attorneys before the settlement was finalized. Dennis Holt did not come out of it cleanly either. The connection to the LLC and what it had been used for became visible to people in his professional circle. His firm lost 2 significant clients in the months following the proceedings. His reputation in Columbus, which had been carefully cultivated, was not what it had been. I don't take pleasure in that exactly, but I won't pretend I didn't notice. My daughter drove back to Portland 2 days after the mediation session. I walked her to her car in the driveway, and we stood there for a moment in that particular Ohio September weather, that clean, cool edge to the air that always reminds me of football games and the smell of leaves starting to turn. "I want you to know something," I told her. "I want you to know that I understand what you gave up to do this." She shook her head. "Dad, I didn't give up anything important. You gave up 8 months of your life." She looked at me in that direct way she has always had, even as a small child, a quality I used to find slightly unnerving and had long since learned to simply respect. "You spent 30 years giving me everything you could." She shrugged. And there was something in the smallness of that gesture that hit me harder than anything else that year. This is just what that looks like when it goes the other way. I didn't have a response to that. I hugged her in the driveway for longer than I probably should have, and she let me, and then she got in her car and drove away, and I stood there until her taillights disappeared at the end of the street. It has been almost 2 years since that day. I am 62 years old and I live alone in a house that I own, and the silence in it does not feel like absence the way I expected it would. It feels like something was removed that I hadn't realized was so heavy until it was gone. I work less now. Not because I have to, though the settlement helped with that, but because I finally asked myself what I was working for and discovered I had been answering that question wrong for a long time. I started walking in the mornings. Just the neighborhood, nothing dramatic. It turns out there is a lot to notice when you are not perpetually calculating how to afford the next thing the person you love says they need. My son took the divorce hard in the beginning. He's 21 now, a junior at Ohio State, and it took him several months to process what had happened without feeling like he had to choose a side. I told him he didn't have to. I told him his mother was still his mother, and that what she did to our marriage and our finances was not the same thing as who she was to him. I meant it. He's finding his way through it. He calls on Sundays now, which is new, and we talk longer than we used to. My daughter made the dean's list both semesters this year. She has a job offer from the auditing firm where she interned, starting next fall. She called me when she got the offer, and she laughed on the phone in a way I hadn't heard since she was about 12 years old, completely unguarded, just happy. I sat in my kitchen and listened to her and thought about the months she spent poring over bank statements at her apartment in Portland, and I thought, you don't know yet what you are, but I do. I heard from Sandra once, about 8 months after the settlement was finalized. A letter, 3 pages, handwritten. I read it completely, which I give myself some credit for given how much of it I wanted to throw across the room. Most of it was justification. She had felt unseen for years. She had felt like the life she was living wasn't the life she had imagined. She had made decisions that she framed, even in the letter, in the passive voice, as though they had happened to her rather than been made by her. But near the end there was a paragraph that was different in tone from the rest. She wrote that she had always believed she was smarter about money than I was, and that this had made it easy to tell herself that what she was doing was a correction rather than a theft. She wrote that sitting through the forensic review, hearing her own decisions, reflected back to her through the language of documentation, had made her understand for the first time that the story she had told herself and the story of what she actually did were not the same story. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She said she knew she wasn't entitled to that. She just wanted me to know that she understood the difference now. I read that paragraph several times. Then I folded the letter and put it in a drawer because I hadn't decided yet whether to keep it or not. That felt honest. Something I have been thinking about lately, and I'll share it because I think it might be useful to someone watching this who is going through something similar. I spent a long time being ashamed that I didn't see it. That is a particular kind of pain that doesn't get talked about much. The financial betrayal was devastating. The infidelity was a different kind of wound. But the thing that sat with me the longest, the thing I had to do the most work around, was the humiliation of having been fooled for so long by someone I thought I knew completely. My daughter said something to me about this during one of our Sunday calls that I have thought about many times since. "Dad," she said, "you're blaming yourself for trusting someone." She paused. "That's not a character flaw, that's just what trusting someone looks like. She was the one who made it wrong." It sounds simple, maybe it is simple, but sometimes the simple things are the ones you need someone else to say out loud before they become real. Last month I went to Portland to visit my daughter. She showed me around the neighborhood where she lives, this walkable area with coffee shops and a farmer's market on Saturdays, and we had dinner at a place she likes where the tables are small and the food is very good. At some point over dinner, she mentioned, casually, the way she mentions things she has been considering for a while before she says them, that she had been seeing someone. "He's an architect," she said. "We've been out 4 times. I think I actually like him." I asked if she was going to bring him to Columbus for the holidays. She gave me the look she gives me when she thinks I am being enthusiastic in a direction she hasn't fully committed to yet. "Maybe Thanksgiving," she said. "Don't make it weird." I told her I would not make it weird. She looked at me across the small table with the expression she gets sometimes, that direct, unguarded look, and she said something that I have been carrying around in my chest ever since. I just want you to be happy, Dad. Like, actually happy. I thought about how to answer that. The honest answer is that I am working on it. That, after 62 years, I am learning, slowly and with some difficulty, the difference between the life I was building for someone else's approval and the life I actually want. That the quiet mornings and the shorter hours and the long walks and the Sunday phone calls are adding up to something I didn't have a word for before, but that I think might just be called peace. I told her I was getting there. She nodded. Good, she said. You're allowed to get there. We drove back to her apartment, and I sat up with a cup of tea while she fell asleep on the couch reading the way she has always fallen asleep reading since she was about 7, book still open on her chest. And I sat in the chair across from her in the quiet, and I thought about the 18 months she spent protecting me and the leather folder and the look on Sandra's face when the documents went across the table, and I thought, I don't know how a person gets lucky enough to have a kid like this. I don't know what I did to deserve it, but I know what she said. I showed up. I worked. I tried to do right by the people I loved, even when they didn't do the same for me. And apparently that was enough to make someone who would do the same for me. That turns out to be the most important thing I built in 34 years of work. Not the house, not the business, not any of the things I thought I was working toward. This. Just this. If you are watching this, and you are going through a betrayal right now, financial or otherwise, I want to tell you something that took me too long to understand. You are not foolish for having trusted someone. You are not weak for not having seen it sooner. The shame belongs to the person who chose to deceive you, not to you for believing the person you loved was who they said they were. The truth is hard to sit with when it first comes out. It rearranges everything you thought was solid and leaves you standing in a room you don't recognize. But it is still better than living inside a lie. It is always better, because at least when you know the truth, you know where the ground actually is. And from there, slowly, you can figure out how to stand on it. That's all I've got. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it gets better. And if you're in the middle of it right now, please stay. Not just until the end of this video. Stay for all of it. It's worth it.